The Kremlin announced this week Russian President Vladimir Putin intends to travel to China in October to attend a forum for China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's a major global infrastructure project led by China. There, Putin is expected to meet with President Xi for the first time since Xi visited Moscow in the spring. Significance of this, Richard, is what?
There actually isn't that much significance, at the risk of, this is a loveless relationship. I got to tell you, you talk to the Chinese about Russia, they're really dismissive. You talk to the Russians about China, they don't take seriously the quote unquote Chinese peace plan. Yeah, this is a relationship. Remember, the current phase that was hatched, or launched just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we're talking about 17, 18 months ago. Clearly, Xi Jinping thought this was a winner. It's like someone comes up to you and says, you want to invest in this, right. Can't lose. Well, guess what? It hasn't gone so well. And China finds itself alienated from a lot of Europe, which it doesn't want to be right now, because the Europeans are saying, why are you helping the Russians? They're the biggest threat. This just hasn't worked out. It's not a natural match. So, yeah, they're going to have this meeting. But all these fears that somehow these two countries were getting close together and this was going to move the strategic center of gravity in the world, not so much. Meanwhile, China's economy is not doing, it's barely growing. 20% of young people are unemployed. So this is in a funny sort of way, it's just not big news, and it's not going to change the fundamentals either on the ground in Ukraine. The only thing to look for, Willie, is whether China is willing to up its help for Russia. And lots of dual-use things. They haven't seemingly done military things yet. That's the one thing to keep an eye on, to make sure that China doesn't cross that line.
But they are offering some support. It may not be military, but certainly supporting Russia on the wrong side of the war.
Diplomatically, economically, they're a big purchaser of Russian energy. They're providing some dual-use technology. The question, again, is they don't go farther.
President Xi does seem to be one of the few people on Earth who could lean on President Putin a little bit and try to encourage him to step away from this war, but he has not shown the willingness to do it yet. Fair?
Totally fair. Might also be that it's premature. If Putin is watching the American political cycle and basically saying wants to see if we lose, if Trump were to win, that would obviously bring about potentially a major change. So I don't think the moment's ripe. I think the real question would be sometime, whether it's at the end of this fighting season, the end of next fighting season after our election, that would be the moment. I think you'd see a full court press by the United States on China to finally call in some of those chits with Russia. We're not there yet, but I think that day will come.
What is the present status of the relationship between the United States and China? There's a big conference this fall, I believe, coming up. President Xi and President Biden will both attend. What are the odds that there'll be a face-to-face meeting between the two of them?
I'd be surprised if there weren't a face-to-face meeting at the so-called APEC summit. I think it's in San Francisco this November, if I have my dates right. There's been a slight uptick in meeting. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, was there. Secretary of State was there. Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, is going there. It's a little bit awkward right now. China just essentially dismissed its foreign minister. So Wang Yi is the Politburo, the state counselor, and the foreign minister. He's got all three hats. So he's both the interlocutor for Tony Blinken and for Jake Sullivan. So there's a bit more interaction, Mike, but it's still not substance. John Kerry was just there. No breakthroughs on the climate front. We still haven't established a floor in the relationship.
Do you think the sanctions that we imposed upon China are hurting the Chinese economy?
A little bit, and I think it's hurting them economically a little bit. And also psychologically, they are persuaded that the United States is now determined to stop China's growth. They actually think we are embarked, let's be blunt about it, on economic warfare. So what China's big goal, it's interesting, they're meeting American economic officials, they're meeting European leaders, they're meeting people like Bill Gates. Why? They want to try to maintain some sort of an economic relationship, try to avoid growing technology limitations and so forth, where we're unwilling to export or allow certain things to be exported to China. So yeah, I think we're hurting the Chinese economy, probably not as much as the Chinese themselves are hurting the Chinese economy through their policies, but they are persuaded that it is our goal to keep them down economically, and some of the policies and some of the pronouncements by this administration reinforce that. And by the way, there's very little difference between the last administration and this administration on policy towards China. If anything, it's gotten tighter.
Jonathan Lemire, I'll kick it to you down in Washington, but as we go down to your point, Richard, front page of the Wall Street Journal, unemployed youth cast pall over China's economy. Unemployment among young Chinese, 21%, John.
Yeah, no question the White House is watching those numbers. But Richard, while you were talking just now, we were showing footage of Vladimir Putin at the Russian-Africa summit that's in St. Petersburg. But photos just emerged in the last few minutes of another attendee at this Russia-Africa summit, Yevgeny Prigozhin. He's there, which is yet another twist here in what has been happening since his failed mutiny of about a month ago. Just curious, I mean, we know the Wagner Group plays a big role in Africa, so that would explain why he is there. But why he's allowed to be there is another matter altogether. What's the latest you have heard just in terms of what is Prigozhin's standing? What is his reality right now? And what does that say about Putin in this moment?
There seems to be some kind of a deal to allow Prigozhin to continue. The Wagner Group, as you correctly say, Jonathan, has played a large foreign policy role, not just for himself and his bankroll in Africa, but also for Russian foreign policy. That seems to be continued, and maybe that's part of their deal, that you don't challenge me at home and I'll let you to continue to do your stuff overseas. And that's my own sense of it. But I don't feel confident in sitting here and giving analysis of what's going on there. That's, you know, the old line that Churchill used about the Soviet Union, a mystery wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in an enigma. And that's something to be said for the Putin-Prigozhin relationship. But the fact that Prigozhin still lives, is still able to do things, suggests to me that they've kind of gone back to the old arrangement, with the understanding that Prigozhin will not be a domestic challenge. Putin will seemingly forgive him for that. The Wagner Group is not central to the war in Ukraine for the time being, but they'll continue their lucrative overseas operations, which is pretty consistent with what Putin wants to do in Africa.
Richard, before we let you go, I've got to ask you about what's going on in Israel. Again this morning, protests in Tel Aviv, protests across the country about the Supreme Court effectively being stripped of its power to be a check on the parliament, on the Knesset. What are we seeing in the streets right now? What does this tell you about Israel today?
Yeah, one last wrinkle to it was the Supreme Court is now being asked to rule that what the Knesset, what the Israeli parliament did, was unconstitutional. I'd be surprised if they did that. That would be a real frontal challenge. This happened, the vote passed. New votes won't happen again until after the Jewish holidays in the fall. And the question then for the Netanyahu government is, do you continue to strengthen the Knesset and weaken the hand of the Supreme Court? They haven't made clear whether they're going to do that. But I think this is more than an immediate battle over the court. I would argue the only way to really understand this is there's been a real power shift in Israel. Politically, you've got the most right-wing government in Israel's history. And then demographically, this reflects the changes. Ultra-Orthodox have large families, immigrants coming, conservative immigrants from Russia, from the Middle East, and the Israel of almost the movie Exodus, the Ari Ben Canaan, sort of Western Ashkenazic, more secular liberal Israel, are increasingly losing political power to the right wing, the cultural and political right. So people are in the street, not just over judicial reform, the power of the Supreme Court, not a technical issue. It's a real question of the direction of Israel. What is going to be the nature of Israeli society? What is the role of religion? Is there going to be any willingness to accommodate Palestinians to come to some kind of a peace? What is the future? The fact that the Israeli markets have tanked the last couple, there's a lot of people in Israel who really make Israeli society, the people in technology, a lot of the people in the reserves, the military, the pilots and the rest, they are worried about the future direction of the country. That's what this is about. As significant as judicial reform is, this is really a fight for the soul of almost for its political character. What is going to be the nature of modern Israel after 75 years? And that has come into play in ways, quite honestly, we could have a version of it here after November next year. It's a fight for the character of the country, politically, culturally, and what's the relationship between the government and the society. So this is really worth watching in terms of this important country, but also for democracies in general.
Is Bibi Netanyahu there, Donald Trump?
To some extent, yes. I think Bibi Netanyahu, like Donald Trump, is worried about losing political power. Because he's worried about the legal ramifications. And one of the things I wrote about, at the risk of being self-referential here in my last book, is in a democracy, you need people to put the country before either their party or their personal situation. And I would say what Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump have in common is both of them put their own personal situation before they put their country. And that is what is so unfortunate about both men.